The stage lights were blinding, but I could still make out my mother's face in the third row. Her mouth was slightly open, hands frozen mid-clap, like she was seeing me for the first time. Behind her, my ex-husband sat perfectly still, his smug expression finally cracked. The same people who'd called my work playing around on the internet were now watching me address 2,000 people about changing the world through digital storytelling. The applause was thunderous, but all I could hear was the silence from 2 years ago when they told me I was wasting my life. Hi, I'm Sierra. And this is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to delivering a TED Talk that would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone who ever believed their passion was too small, too different, or too online to matter. The words hit me like ice water. Sierra, you're 31 years old. When are you going to get serious about your life? I stood in my childhood kitchen, still holding the coffee mug I'd just filled, watching my mother's perfectly lipsticked mouth deliver the verdict I'd been dreading for months. Behind her, my sister Emma nodded sympathetically, her MBA degree practically glowing from the wall like a certificate of worthiness. Mom, I am serious. My channel has your channel. She said it like I'd told her I was majoring in finger painting. Honey, talking to a camera in your apartment isn't a career. It's a hobby that's gotten out of hand. The coffee burned my throat as I forced myself to take a sip, buying time. Through the kitchen window, I could see Dad washing his car in the driveway, meticulously scrubbing each spoke of the wheels. He'd been avoiding this conversation for weeks. It's not just talking to a camera, I said quietly. I have 300,000 subscribers. I'm helping people tell their stories, teaching them video editing, building a community of teenagers and unemployed people. Emma interrupted, not looking up from her phone. Sierra, I showed your videos to my colleagues. They think it's cute. But it's not going to pay for your retirement. It's not going to get you health insurance. The familiar tightness gripped my chest. The same feeling I'd had in high school when they'd asked why I couldn't be more like Emma, straight A's, student council, early admission to business school. The feeling I'd had when I dropped out of my marketing job 2 years ago to focus on my YouTube channel full-time. Actually, it already is paying, I started. Barely, Mom cut me off. We've seen your apartment, honey. We know you're struggling. My apartment. 1 bedroom in a converted warehouse, furniture from Craigslist, but filled with the best camera equipment I could afford. Walls covered with storyboards and planning calendars for videos that had genuinely changed people's lives. I'd shown them the comments, the emails from viewers who'd started their own businesses, found their voices, healed from trauma through the storytelling techniques I taught. They'd scrolled past them all to focus on my thrift store coffee table. Look, Emma said, finally putting down her phone. There's a position opening up at my firm. Marketing coordinator. It's entry-level, but it's stable. Good benefits. You could do your little videos on the weekends. Little videos. On weekends. I set down my mug harder than I meant to. My little videos helped Sarah Martinez launch a non-profit that's raised $500,000 for abuse survivors. My little videos taught Kevin Chen how to document his grandfather's immigration story before Alzheimer's took those memories away. My little videos are very nice, sweetie, Mom said in that voice she'd used when I was 7 and showed her a drawing I was proud of. But you can't eat views and subscribers. You need security. You need a real job. The word real hung in the air like smoke. Dad chose that moment to come inside, wiping his hands on a rag that smelled like car wax and disappointment. He glanced between the 3 of us, reading the room with the accuracy of someone who'd been married for 35 years. How's the job search going, kiddo? He asked, not quite meeting my eyes. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, I wasn't that fragile anymore. But crack, like the first fissure in a dam that's been holding back too much pressure for too long. There is no job search, I said. Because I already have a job. I have a business. I have an audience that depends on me, collaborations lined up for the next 6 months, and an income that— What? Emma's voice had an edge now. That lets you live in that shoebox and eat ramen? That lets me sleep at night knowing I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom straightened a dish towel that didn't need straightening. Dad studied his rag like it held the secrets of the universe. Emma went back to her phone. Sierra, Mom said finally, her voice gentle but firm. We love you. We want what's best for you. But this fantasy has gone on long enough. You're not a teenager anymore. It's time to. The phrase every creative person dreads, because it always means the same thing: give up. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast before school for 18 years, where I'd told them about my first job, my first heartbreak, my first small victories. The same kitchen where I'd tried, unsuccessfully, to explain why stories mattered. Why helping people find their voices mattered. Why building something from nothing, one video at a time, mattered. They'd never understood. And looking at their faces now, loving but determined, worried but convinced they knew better, I realized they never would. I said quietly. Mom's face brightened immediately. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Emma, call your contact on Monday morning. No. I set my mug in the sink, watching the last drops of coffee swirl down the drain. I said, okay. I understand that you think what I do is worthless. I understand that you think I'm wasting my life. I understand that nothing I've accomplished matters to you because it doesn't fit into your definition of success. The brightness faded from Mom's face. Sierra, that's not, but here's what you don't understand. I turned to face them, feeling steadier than I had in months. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. Emma had stopped scrolling. Dad had stopped fidgeting with his rag. I'm going home, I said. And I'm going to keep doing exactly what I've been doing. Because tomorrow, I have a call with someone who actually values what I've built. I headed toward the front door, my footsteps echoing in the hallway lined with Emma's achievement certificates and family photos where I always looked slightly out of place. Sierra, wait, Mom called after me. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, not turning around. Who's the call with? I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Ted. The drive home was a blur of suburban streets and racing thoughts. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally saying what I'd been thinking for 2 years. I'd told them about Ted like it was already a done deal. I was already confirmed to speak. The truth was more complicated. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment, watching a group of kids skateboard around the parking lot. One of them, maybe 12 years old, was filming the others with his phone, shouting directions like a tiny film director. Again, but this time jump higher. The light's perfect right now. A month ago, that kid would have reminded me why I did what I did. Today, he just reminded me how much I had at stake. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Sierra, Mom's crying. Call her. I turned off the phone. Inside my apartment, the familiar chaos of my workspace greeted me like an old friend. 3 cameras set up at different angles, a ring light that had seen better days, editing monitors displaying the timeline of my latest video about authentic storytelling. The walls were covered with printed comments from viewers, my daily reminder that this work mattered to someone, even if it didn't matter to my family. But sitting at my desk, staring at the email that had arrived 3 days ago, I felt the weight of what I'd just promised them. Subject: TED Talk opportunity. Initial interest. Dear Sierra, your work in digital storytelling has come to our attention through several recommendations. We're hosting TEDx San Francisco next year and would like to explore the possibility of you speaking about the intersection of technology and human connection. This is an initial inquiry. If you're interested, please submit a detailed proposal outlining your talk concept, target audience, and key takeaways. The selection process is highly competitive. Best regards, Marcus Chin. TEDx San Francisco Organizing Committee. Initial inquiry. Highly competitive. The words I'd conveniently omitted when I'd announced to my family that I had a call with Ted. The call was real, scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. But it wasn't a confirmation. It was an audition. I opened a new document and stared at the blank page. The cursor blinked accusingly. Talk title: nothing. Key message: nothing. Target audience: everyone who'd ever been told their passion wasn't real enough, profitable enough, legitimate enough. But I couldn't write that. TED Talks needed to be universal, transformative, backed by research and data and credentials I wasn't sure I had. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Sierra? This is Marcus Chen from TEDx San Francisco. I hope you don't mind me calling a day early. I had a few minutes and thought we could chat informally before our scheduled call tomorrow. My heart stopped. Of course. Yes, thank you for calling. Great. So I've watched several of your videos, and I'm really impressed with the community you've built. Tell me, what initially drew you to focus on storytelling through digital platforms? The question I'd been asked 100 times, but suddenly my mind went blank. All I could hear was Emma's voice, cute, but not a real career. Well, I noticed that traditional storytelling, books, films, even corporate presentations, they all follow these established rules about who gets to tell stories and how. But online, especially on platforms like YouTube, anyone can share their truth. A kid in rural Montana can teach someone in Tokyo about their culture, or a survivor can help someone going through the same trauma feel less alone. Interesting. And you see this as more than just content creation? More than just. There it was again, that phrase that implied what I did was somehow less than real work. I see it as democratizing one of humanity's most fundamental needs, I said, finding my footing. We're all hardwired to share and hear stories. But for most of human history, only certain people, with certain resources, certain access, certain backgrounds, got to tell the stories that shaped culture. Digital platforms changed that. Can you give me a specific example? I thought of Kevin Chen, the subscriber who documented his grandfather's immigration story. But would Marcus think that was too small, too personal? One of my community members, Kevin, reached out last year because his grandfather was in early-stage Alzheimer's. Kevin had never made a video before, barely knew how to use his phone's camera. But he wanted to preserve his grandfather's memories of immigrating from China in the 1960s. I was gaining confidence now, remembering why this mattered. I taught him basic filming techniques, how to ask the right questions, how to edit in a way that honored his grandfather's dignity. The video he created became a family treasure, but more than that, he posted it publicly, and it connected with thousands of people who had similar stories about their own immigrant grandparents. Some reached out to Kevin directly. Others started documenting their own family histories. That's powerful, Marcus said. But for a TED Talk, we'd need you to go bigger. What's the larger implication? How does this personal story connect to a broader trend or transformation in society? Bigger. Broader. The words that made my stomach twist. I think. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I think we're witnessing the first generation in human history where every person has the potential to be a storyteller on a global scale. And that's not just changing how we consume media, it's changing how we understand empathy, connection, and truth itself. Silence on the other end. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. That's exactly the kind of thinking we're looking for, Marcus finally said. Here's what I need from you, a 15-minute talk that proves this thesis. Not just personal anecdotes, but data, research, a clear progression from problem to solution to vision for the future. 15 minutes to justify my entire career. To prove that what my family called playing around on the internet was actually reshaping human connection. The deadline for proposals is Friday, he continued. We'll review submissions over the weekend and notify selected speakers by Monday. Just so you know, we received over 800 applications this year. We're selecting 12 speakers. 800 applications, 12 speakers. I did the math automatically, a 1.5% acceptance rate. Thank you so much for considering me, I managed. Thank you for the work you're doing, Sierra. I'm genuinely excited to see your proposal. The line went dead. I sat staring at my reflection in the black computer screen. Behind me, visible in the reflection, was the vision board I'd created 2 years ago when I'd first quit my marketing job. Pictures of stages, audiences, people holding microphones. Dreams that had seemed impossible then, and somehow seemed even more impossible now. Friday. 4 days to write a proposal that would either validate everything I'd built or prove my family right. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Mom. Honey, we just want you to be happy and secure. We love you no matter what. I almost laughed. Love me no matter what, as long as what I was doing looked like what they thought success should look like. But sitting there in my tiny apartment, surrounded by the tools of a trade they didn't understand, I realized something had shifted during that conversation in their kitchen. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval to know what I was worth. I just needed to prove it to 1,200 strangers at TED. I opened a new document and started typing. Talk title, The Story Revolution, How Digital Natives Are Rewriting the Rules of Human Connection. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number immediately. It was my ex-husband. I stared at David's name on my phone screen for 3 rings before answering. Sierra? I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. His voice was exactly the same, that careful, measured tone he'd used during our marriage whenever he was about to deliver what he considered constructive criticism. The tone that had slowly convinced me I was too much, too loud, too unrealistic about everything. What do you want, David? I heard about your situation with your family. Emma mentioned you're still doing the YouTube thing. The YouTube thing. Not even YouTube channel or video business. Just thing, like it was a phase I'd eventually outgrow. I'm working, I said, glancing at my computer screen where the TED proposal cursor was still blinking. Was there something specific you needed? Look, I know things ended badly between us, but I care about you. And I heard about this TED thing you mentioned to your mom. My blood went cold. Emma told you? She's worried. We all are. Sierra, you can't just make announcements like that when it's not. He sighed, that frustrated exhale I remembered from 100 arguments. You're setting yourself up for a very public failure. I closed my eyes, seeing him in my mind. Probably sitting in his pristine home office, wearing one of his expensive button-downs, surrounded by his MBA certificates and corporate achievement awards. The same office where he'd told me, 2 years ago, that my hobby was becoming embarrassing. Thanks for the concern, I said evenly. But I'm fine. Are you? Because from what I hear, you're barely scraping by, and now you're telling people you're speaking at TED when you don't even have. Goodbye, David. I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. The silence in my apartment was deafening. But in that silence, something crystallized. I wasn't going to let their doubt become my reality. I looked at my vision board, at the pictures of stages and microphones, and started typing. 4 days later the email arrived at 6:23 a.m. on Monday morning. Subject, TEDx San Francisco speaker selection accepted. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. Then I called in sick to the coffee shop where I'd been working part-time and spent the entire day crafting a talk that would either change everything or destroy me trying. 6 months later, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sierra Adams. The stage lights were blinding, but I could still make out my mother's face in the 3rd row. Her mouth was slightly open, hands frozen mid-clap, like she was seeing me for the first time. Behind her, David sat perfectly still, his smug expression finally cracked. I walked to the red circle at center stage, feeling the weight of 15 minutes that would define everything I'd built. The audience fell silent. 2,000 people, waiting. 2 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My family staged an intervention. Not for drugs or alcohol, but for something they considered equally destructive, my belief that helping people tell their stories online was a real career. A few chuckles from the audience. In the 3rd row, I saw Mom shift uncomfortably. They told me I was wasting my life. Playing around on the internet. Living in a fantasy where likes and subscribers could somehow translate into meaning, impact, or financial stability. I found my rhythm, the same rhythm I'd discovered in my tiny apartment, talking to a camera about things that mattered. They weren't wrong about one thing. What I was doing didn't look like traditional success. But here's what they missed, and what I think we're all missing as we navigate this digital age. We're witnessing the first generation in human history where every person has the potential to be a storyteller on a global scale. I clicked to my first slide, a map showing the geographic distribution of my YouTube community. Red dots scattered across 6 continents. This is my audience. 300,000 people from 127 countries. Teenagers in rural Texas sharing poetry that's helping them process trauma. Grandmothers in Seoul teaching traditional cooking techniques to their granddaughters in Los Angeles. Immigrants documenting their journeys for children who might never have known their stories otherwise. Click. A screenshot of comments from my most popular video. These aren't just views or engagement metrics. These are human connections happening at a scale and speed that was impossible just 1 generation ago. And the people facilitating these connections, people like me, people my family calls unemployed, were not playing around. We're revolutionizing empathy itself. I could see some audience members leaning forward now. In the 3rd row, Mom had stopped shifting. But here's the problem. We're still measuring the value of this work using industrial age metrics, revenue, traditional employment, institutional recognition. We're asking digital age storytellers to prove their worth using analog age scorecards. Click. A graph showing the mental health impact of storytelling communities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez at Stanford recently published research showing that people who participate in digital storytelling communities report 40% lower rates of depression and 60% higher rates of what psychologists call narrative identity, knowing who you are and how you fit into the larger human story. I paused, letting the data sink in. We're not just creating content, we're creating connection. We're not just building audiences, we're building bridges between cultures, between generations, between people who thought they were alone in their struggles. Click. A photo of Kevin and his grandfather, the video that had started it all. This is Kevin Chen and his grandfather. Kevin reached out to me because he wanted to preserve his grandfather's immigration story before Alzheimer's took those memories. The video they created together has been watched 2.3 million times. But more importantly, it inspired over 10,000 people to start documenting their own family histories. My voice caught slightly, and I let it. This was the moment that mattered. Kevin's grandfather passed away 3 months after they filmed that story. But because a 30-year-old unemployed woman in a converted warehouse apartment taught his grandson how to use a camera, that story lives forever. And not just for Kevin's family, for everyone who needed to hear that immigration is not just about struggle, but about hope, sacrifice, and love. The auditorium was completely silent now. So when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them this: I teach people that their stories matter, that their voices deserve to be heard, that the tools to change the world are already in their pocket, and all they need is someone to show them how to use them. Click. My final slide, a simple text quote. Maya Angelou said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." But for the first time in human history, no story has to remain untold. Every person can be both storyteller and audience. Every voice can find its tribe. I stepped away from the podium, into the red circle, speaking directly to the audience now. The future belongs to the storytellers, not just the ones with publishing deals or film contracts, but the ones with smartphones and stories and the courage to press record. And if you think that's not real work, if you think that's not changing the world, you're not paying attention. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. Standing ovation. 2,000 people on their feet. But all I could see was my mother, tears streaming down her face, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Behind her, David sat frozen, finally understanding what he'd walked away from. As I walked off stage, my phone, which I'd turned back on that morning, buzzed with notifications. Messages from subscribers who'd watched the live stream. Collaboration requests from organizations I'd only dreamed of working with. And one text from Mom: "We were wrong. I'm so proud of who you've become." I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket without responding. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone else's validation to know what I was worth. I was a storyteller. And finally, I had told my own story.